So in this video we're going to look at inverse functions. Now inverse functions, well, if f of x, we'll look at the same function we looked at in the last video. If this is the function machine that we're focusing on, then f inverse, okay, goes back the other way. So it takes an input and takes us back to the original. So if we look at going the other way, well, from the last thing we did was to square root. So when we're doing the inverse function, the first thing we're going to do is to square the input. So going back this way, we're going to get x squared. So we put x into the inverse, we get x squared, and then we subtracted 6. So going the other way, we're going to add 6. So you do everything the opposite way in the reverse order as well. Okay, so our inverse function should be x squared plus 6. Okay. We could write this as the f inverse of x is x squared plus 6. Now we can test whether this is the inverse function. Okay, so if you remember some of the answers we had before, f of 10 was 2. So that meant when we put 10 into the function machine, we got an answer of 2. So that means that f inverse of 2 should be 10. So if we look at what happens when we put 2 in to the inverse function, we square 2 and then we add 6. 2 squared plus 6 is 10. So that means when we put 2 into the inverse function, we get back the original answer that we wanted. Okay, let's look at a different one. So f of 15, well, that would be the square root of 15 minus 6. The square root of 15 minus 6 is the square root of 9, which is 3. So when I put 3 into the inverse function, 15 should come back out. 3 squared plus 6 is 9 plus 6, which is 15. Good. Okay, now I'm going to give you a method for finding inverse functions. So this was a very simple inverse function, but they can get more complicated. So this is the method we're going to use. So we start with, instead of writing f of x is equal to the square root of x minus 6, we write y is equal to the square root of x minus 6. Okay, this is the first step. Now what we're going to do is we're going to switch every time you see a y, write an x, and every time you write an x, see an x, write a y. Okay? So we get to this stage. Now what you have to do is you have to rearrange that red equation there, x is equal to the square root of y minus 6, to make y the subject. Okay? So, to make y the subject, you might square both sides, so we get x squared is equal to y minus 6, and then you would add 6 to both sides to get x squared plus 6 is equal to y. Okay? So this function here, this function I've got, is the inverse function. Yeah, so this, what we found, is the inverse function. Okay, we're going to look at an example of how this method works in practice with a different function. Now this function we might label as g, it just has a different name. So g of x might be 3x minus 1. Now the question is to find the inverse function, g inverse. Okay? So we write y is equal to 3x minus 1, we swap the x's and the y's, and then we're going to rearrange to make y the subject. So to make y the subject we might, well, maybe you could pause here and work out what the rearranged equation would be to make y the subject. So you'd add 1 to both sides, and then you divide by 3. This, then, is the inverse function. G inverse of x is x plus 1 over 3. Let's do that with another example. Let's have another function h of x. And let's say h of x is equal to 3 over 4x plus 1. Find the inverse function. Find the h inverse. So maybe you could pause the video here and see if you can do all the steps yourself. So we write this as y is equal to 3 over 4x plus 1. Then switch the x's and y's. Pause the video to do that. Now rearrange to make y the subject. Well, what you might do is you might multiply by 4y plus 1. You might then divide by x. Oh, I've expanded here. I wonder why I've expanded. Okay, yeah, I'm expanding because I'm trying to make y the subject. I wouldn't have divided. I could have divided. Anyway. So then I might subtract x from both sides from here. Now I might divide by 4x, and y would then be the subject. You might have written as your answer, this would have also been valid, I believe, 3 over x minus 1, all divided by 4. But if you got this answer, that's great. So the inverse function then, here, is what I found it to be. 3 minus x over 4x. Okay, maybe see if you can follow each line of the steps I just took. Okay, so we'll leave that video here, and I'll look at another video for talking about composite functions.